Today we are interviewing Michael J. Lynch, who has been professor of law and director of the law library at Atlanta's John Marshall Law School since January 1st, 1997. Prior to that, Mike, as he is usually called, worked as a librarian at the Universities of Toledo and Florida State. He practiced law for a few years and taught at Emory University before becoming a law librarian. Mike, let's begin with a little personal history. Can you tell us where you were raised and about your family when you were young and your life today?
I grew up in Detroit, graduated from high school in 1958. I grew up in what's now the deep inner city of Detroit and was fairly much the inner city when I was there. Our neighborhood where I grew up changed, so that by the time I was, I'd say, in the 6th or 7th grade, there were a few white Catholic families left, but basically it was a black area. I went to Catholic schools, and in high school I went to the Jesuit high school, which is out of the north edge of Detroit, so I rode buses out there daily. My mother had four sisters that were all school teachers except for one who was a librarian in the Detroit Public Library system. After high school at the University of Detroit High School, I went to the University of Detroit. And my older sister went to a nearby Catholic girls' college, Marygrove, got out of college and took a library science degree also and became a librarian at the University of Detroit, where she knew Roger Jacobs, who while she was there was the director at the University of Detroit. I knew Roger because we were in undergraduate school at the same time. When I graduated from from college, luckily, I had no particular ambitions, and I had a good friend who, in the middle of college, decided for us that we were going to law school. And by the time I was a senior in college, he had decided that we were going to the University of Michigan Law School. I was naive enough that I had really no idea that there was a big difference between going to University of Detroit or Wayne State and going to the University of Michigan for law school. But I was directed by this friend and went up there and had a wonderful time. Through another pure chance, I was alerted to a scholarship awarded out of Chicago that I was able to get that made law school free for me, tuition, room and board, books, the works. I learned about this scholarship about a week before the applications had to be filed, so I had quite a bit of luck there. After law school, I went with a big firm in Detroit. Of course, at this time, 65 when I got out of law school, a big firm in Detroit was 50 lawyers. And I was there about 5 years and couldn't see myself actually making a lifetime career out of that. Although I liked the work and I liked the people I worked with very much. Just couldn't see myself as moving into their lives. So I became a teacher at law school and starting at Emory University. And while I was at Emory University, I had some life events that discouraged me with the way my career was going, and I wanted a little something more than the teaching and scholarship. My scholarship, I didn't have any broad interests. I was in doing huge projects of great importance. I was doing minor publications to satisfy the requirements of the job. But the library school at Emory, which is now closed, was right across the street from the law school. And not only did my aunt and my older sister have library degrees, but by this time my two younger sisters had also taken library degrees. My sister Nora came out of college and worked for a year or two and picked up a library degree from the University of Michigan at a distance program that they then ran in Detroit. and she went to Wayne State University Law Library, where she worked for a number of years. But by the time I was teaching at Emory, she had moved out from law librarianship into work eventually as an administrative law judge in Michigan. My younger sister, Patty, had a library degree and was a librarian at the University of Detroit Dental School. But shortly after the time when I stopped teaching and got my library degree, she went to Michigan State University, got a master's degree in nutrition, and worked in hospitals as a nutritionist. So by the time I was a librarian, all of my sisters had been librarians, but no longer were. My older sister, after a short career as an academic reference librarian, became a teacher at the University of Michigan's library school, and went from that to getting a PhD at Rutgers in library science, but didn't return to being a librarian, but worked for the ALA for the rest of her life as eventually, I think, the director of something they call their Office of Statistics and Research. So while I was at Emory teaching in law school, I picked up a library degree across the road at the school that's now closed. Then, having gotten this degree, I was going to leave the teaching and go into a career in librarianship. And at that time, I'd had approaches from a few schools that were looking for a director who had both degrees. And I felt confident that it would be an easy transition. And while I was teaching at Emory, I had bought about 80 acres of mountain land north of Atlanta with a little cabin on it. And I wanted to go and live up there for a while. So I did that and read everything that I had on my accumulated list of things I'd like to read. And I figured I would live there for 1 year, and in the second year I would start sending my resume out and looking for work. But after a year and a half, my father back in Detroit had a stroke. This was the time when my sister Patty was doing her graduate degree in nutrition, and my family still lived in the inner city, not quite as inner city as we had been when I grew up, but the inner city had moved out with us. And I didn't want her dropping out of her graduate school program, so I thought I would go up there and live with my family, my mother, who was taking care of my father at home, until he died, which was expected to be fairly soon. But it stretched on, and I was, again, enjoying my time up there. And eventually, I had 5 years without any employment, which is a dreadful thing to have on your resume. So what I did was go back to the law firm that I had been with before as a sort of a research person, well, in a sort of an ill-defined position. But when I walked in the door, they were retained by American Motors, which was then in the throes of litigation over Jeep rollover cases. And the cases for the plaintiffs were sort of weak because the drivers were often drunk. But burdensome discovery was the method that was used by the plaintiffs' lawyers to bring about a settlement. They needed organization of all the discovery documents, which turned out to be everything in the company because of the nature of the defect, which was a design defect. Warranty claims were involved, all the advertising. And I set up a system of controlling all the documents that would be used in responding to discovery, while they were trying to set up a computerized system that would do that work in an automated way, which, so far as I never worked very well, but my system worked very well. But while this was going on, I took a job at Florida State as a reference librarian. And I was, of course, very integrated into the American Motors defense by this time. So for the first couple of years I was at Florida State, about 1 week out of every 5 or 6, I would go up to Detroit and work for American Motors, billing them by the hour for a very reasonable rate in light of what law firms were charging, but very good for me since I had no overhead. And in fact, I made more money from American Motors than I did from Florida State. And just when this period came to an end, Gail Reinertson, who was the associate director there, left to go to work for Carswell as a sales rep. And I moved into her job, which then paid me enough to support my growing family. After a number of years there, I went up to University of Toledo, where I stayed for a number of years, 6 years, I think. And at the end of that time, I had fallen into some conflicts with academic politics that led me to need to get out of there, which led to me taking a job in Atlanta, where I'd always wanted to be, at John Marshall, which was then not ABA accredited, but about to be required to get ABA accredited or lose its right for its graduates to take the Bar Association, which had been granted by the Georgia Supreme Court. So I went to John Marshall for a period of about 4 years, the survival of the school was fairly doubtful. I was just cleaning out some files, and I came across a memo from the then dean of the school, Robert D'Agostino, telling me, as of a certain date, cancel all subscriptions. Our finances were shaky, and as I recall, this was one of 2 times when I got the message to cancel all subscriptions. Of course, then we had to restore all subscriptions in a fairly short time as finances straightened out. Luckily, I had a wonderful and somewhat workaholic acquisitions librarian working for me. It wasn't welcome, but after the first time, we knew just what to do. And of course, it's a pain in the neck restoring and getting everything, the missing issues back and stuff, but we did it. Eventually, John Marshall, without going too far, got itself qualified for and received ABA provisional accreditation and then final accreditation, and the library grew and prospered, although never grew to the state of an old-time library. One of the things that I always held back on was filling out my collection of print law journals, particularly the less than the first law review at various schools, because I always thought, well, sooner or later, an inspection team will come through and they'll say, you need to get more law reviews, and then I could say, order all these law reviews, but no one ever said that. Because by the time we were going, in the early 90s, by the time we were going for accreditation, it seemed to me that only the librarian on the committee or the council of the ABA, only the librarian was likely to be very concerned about, particularly about print volumes, and even the librarian pretty much knew the game was up for that. But the other people on the committee mostly were, as people seemed to be in those days, overconfident about the idea that everything will be on the computer, and you don't need to worry too much about the print. I'm kind of drifting at this point, but I remember at the time what I realized in a few years was that I think as librarians, we didn't realize how quickly memory was going to become infinitely cheap. The idea that all the back law reviews and all the old session laws, for instance, historical material, that all of this would become available online. I just didn't see how that would happen because memory seemed to be scarce. Then the thing that happened, I think, is that when people discovered that it was simple to scan microfilm, then once you scanned the most important stuff, you had these operations set up for scanning microfilm, and you had to keep feeding them so that everything that, I suppose by now everything that ever was microfilmed has been scanned and is available somewhere in a digital form. Certainly everything that has any importance at all. Where are we?
Well, you actually anticipated some of the things that I wanted to highlight in the interview, but there is still a question, Mike, that I will pose. Obviously, you have seen an awful lot of changes in law librarianship, the ways we make legal material available to our users. And you've just described a lot of those. Could you comment on the role, whether you see that changing, the role of the library, the role of the librarians changing in the, say, the next few years or foreseeable future? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Only the thought that we're not going to be able to predict what's going to. It seems really clear, I think, to me that as the databases multiply, our professors, for instance, in the schools, no matter how expert they are in a field, are not going to be, and no matter how computer literate they are, they simply are not going to want to have the kind of expertise in knowing lots of databases that librarians are going to maintain. There'll continue to be a need for experts that don't get into the data but know where to find it. As far as the maintenance of huge or even serious large book collections, I think that's going to certainly drop off as a main function. But expertise is going to be, there's going to be a center of data finding expertise at a law school. And it's going to have the name of library, although it may not resemble very much what we've been used to.
You have served our profession in a number of ways. Specifically, I want to mention that you have written articles, one of which was published in the Law Library Journal back in 1997, and won the Article of the Year Award. That was your article entitled "An Impossible Task, but Everybody Has to Do It." Could you share with us any thoughts you might have about the desirability of law librarians, certainly academic law librarians, but perhaps others, writing for publication, and perhaps as you have, not only in the law librarianship field, but also in substantive legal fields, legal topics as well? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have often been worried by situations where librarians are expected to publish in some places even for continuation in their jobs for places that have like a library system of tenure. When I was at the University of Toledo, I was, one of my functions was the director of the legal writing program, though I didn't teach in it. And I've seen situations where, apart from librarians, but it will be analogous, legal writing teachers have a publication requirement imposed on them. The publication requirement for professors is much easier to fulfill because, as I describe it to people, when you're a young professor, your first year teaching a subject, you stay ahead of the students. That's about as much as you can do. The second year, you go back and all the areas you've seen where you didn't really understand, you try to resolve those problems. By your third year, you realize that some of those problems are not resolvable, and the people that you have read that tried to resolve them haven't done a very good job, and sometimes you have an idea of what would be a better approach. Then you write an article consisting of, here's why the present approach is screwed up, here's why cases come out wrong, here is my approach, and here's why the cases would come out right. And then you have an article. Now, that depends on a lot of concern with the subject matter. The article I wrote about teaching legal writing, teaching legal research as a part of a legal writing course, was based on some years of experience with teachers who were teaching both legal writing and legal research. And the point of the article really was that you can't possibly make up and give enough research problems to people who are also being graded for their writing. In the course of a legal writing course, you can't give them the number of problems they would get in 1 month working for a law firm where the problems are made up by real people and you don't have to do that kind of work. And the judgment is made by another lawyer who isn't really paid for doing it, but it does it automatically. a legal writing course just can't give the research opportunities because they're more concerned with the writing opportunities, which takes longer. Another thing I said in this article that was the reason why it was turned down by a reviewer for the Journal of Legal Education, he actually commented on this, why this person actually says that finding of legal materials is not as important as thinking about legal materials. And indeed, that was a point that I really intended to make, so it really amused me. I got turned down by the Journal of Legal Education pretty much the week that the call for papers came out from the Law Library Journal. And I sent it in, and at that time, I don't know whether it still is, and I didn't have any idea this was the case, there was some money attached to that award, and it was short of $1,000, but it might have been $800. It was from Matthew Bender at the time, which was a complete surprise to me and a very pleasant surprise. It was serious money back then. Not like winning the lottery, but when it was pure chance, it was very pleasant. But I think it's very difficult for librarians to find things that are suitable for publication, that they are interested enough and have the time to pursue. But if you're clever, ideas do come to you. I mean, I've seen some librarians where things worked out from their work, from things they were doing, a little side issue from something that a professor asked them to look into that was publishable for librarians. And examples escape me right at this moment, but I think it's terrible if it's required for promotion or to keep your job, because it's the people that do publication, take law professors particularly, it flows out of your work. And if you are in a full-time job, and a librarian has a full-time job, with a law professor, the full-time job nature of their position is full-time because publication and research is expected as part of their time. A librarian, it's not like that. It's all it's something extra that you have to pursue because of an interest. Even if you're deeply interested in it, nobody says work 4 hours a day for the summer while you're pursuing your interest in the copyright opinions of learned hand, or some subject of that sort. And you don't have the experience that a professor has of teaching a matter year after year till the point where you have to puzzle over the problems and you realize proper subjects for writing.
Thank you, Michael Lynch, for allowing us to visit with you today and for taking these few moments to share so much about yourself and about our profession. Before closing, however, is there anything you would like to add before we conclude this interview?
No, I think I've given you enough of my mind.
Fair enough. I've enjoyed listening to what you've had to say today, and I'm sure our readers will as well. So again, thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.